So, welcome again, everybody who's joined, particularly those who've coming back for more. Working through the core modules of the handbook by popular request, but I don't know why, we have junctions and roundabouts.
Hey.
And what it says in the handbook is how to safely enter, negotiate and leave junctions and roundabouts while executing the planning to stop and looking to go information approach required of advanced drivers. So I'm rather hoping everybody really kind of knows this. But before we get going with that, I'm going to do, because there's one or two new faces, sort of intro to the session. My name's David Reeves. I look after training here at the Northampton group. We're a car group, and I'm a retired IT consultant. And when I kind of got made redundant, and before I decided this was going to be retirement instead, I decided to retrain and trained as an ADI before deciding I don't think I really wanted to train 17-year-olds to drive. So although I'm a qualified ADI, I've never actually been an ADI. I do lots of other voluntary things. I'm a governor at a primary school and I help out there as well. I'm also a JP. That's about me. The reason we started this thing was I'm trying to put together a training package for our observers. And I thought what would be good would be to reiterate what are the core subjects that we're meant to leave our associates with. And one of those things was the core modules. So it's re-looking at those, re-emphasizing the sort of thing we should be teaching and reiterating what I think are the things that associates struggle with sometimes and the key things we may want to look at, but also to invite you as observers, if indeed you are observers or trainee observers, to kind of chip in and think about it and consider how we might go about teaching this in the future. What it's not is really a train the train. It's not about how to go about these things, how to plan a lesson. Now, I started with some of the areas that are more theoretical, like human factors, and some of the more difficult ones in the practical session, like overtaking. I'm now getting onto something that is fairly core and a practical skill. Junctions and roundabouts, well, it doesn't get much more practical than that. And so, you know, this has proved one of the hardest ones to put together because most of the stuff we would do in that session are practical sessions. So what do you do if you're putting together a PowerPoint presentation about something and it's difficult and you can't think where to start? Well, obviously you mention history. So here's a historical map. And if you're going to mention history, you have to start with what the Romans did. You know, what did the Romans ever do for us? So there we go. Drawn in the style of a tube map, here's a map of Roman Britain. There's Londinium. Oh, you can't see me moving my mouse. Let me put my amazing laser pointer up. There's Londinium down here. And if you wanted to come and see us, you'd have to come up this blue route here, later called Watling Street, past Verulamium and past Lactodorum, which happens to be where Henny is, more or less. Yeah. And I live quite close to Banaventa, which actually I'm in an archaeological group as well, which excavated a few years back. So come up there. So really it's very straightforward. As long as you get the right road out of Londinium, your only problem is the junction at Verulamium, really, and the difficult people obviously you found at Lactodorum. But Verulamium, you have to be careful because you're coming up here down this kind of thing. There's a bugger of a junction there, and you will, there's the forum, you will get these people zooming out in their chariots right in front of you, just beyond that, and you've got to make sure you take the right road out. Now, why is he going on about this? Well, a lot of our road infrastructure has been around for a very long time, including these particular roads. In fact, there's the junction today. It's obviously Verulamium is St Albans. There's a roundabout, and if you had sort of very good vision, somewhere in the back there, about there, there's a brown sign that says Roman remains. You can go and look at it. So we largely inherit a lot of the road structure we've got. So let's move on from that. Didn't think I'd be looking at European Commission data, but in all of their stuff about accident concentrations and what countries should be doing, it's quite an interesting figure that 60% of total number of accidents occur at junctions. Now, this is almost no surprise to us IAM-wise, because it's one of the main hazards that we consider when we're teaching people. The interesting other statistic was 20% of fatalities. So although there's quite a high number of accidents, it's not, they don't always cause deaths, and that kind of makes sense because they tend to be lower speed, not always, but tend to be the sort of thing that causes injury or just damage only. Now, up to now, with the Roman period onwards, basically we have crossroads and we have kind of T-junctions and variations on a theme. And for lots of years, the only other thing that we could have is a roundabout. They've been around for quite a few years. And from a design point of view, they look at how many different ways on a given junction you can run into somebody. So a basic crossroads like this and comes up with 32 conflict points, whereas a T-junction like this, three-way junction, has about 9 ways of running into people. More about that in a minute. This means that over the years, more weird and wonderful ways have been designed to try and limit some of these conflict points. Now, it's worth looking at this for a moment. I, on purpose, taking the simplest one of these conflict points is the method that forms the basis of how road engineers start modeling junctions and traffic flows and so on. So let's imagine, here's a bog standard T-junction then. And if you're going from left to right, you can go straight ahead or you can turn left. Please ignore the slightly dodgy graphics on this one. Now, of course, when you're pausing there or slowing down to turn left up into that side road, somebody could hit you from behind. Alternatively, you might drive into somebody that you haven't seen until you turn the corner. So a lot of what we do in IAM is sort of mitigation for that. It's checking your mirrors, slowing down, signaling, moving down into another lane, getting out of the way to kind of mitigate that risk. Obviously, if you're going the other way, same sort of thing, and you could go straight ahead or you can turn right into that lane. And the same sort of thing, you could be hit from behind while you're waiting. So again, slowing down, signaling, moving your position and so on, mitigates that. We're also crossing the other lane. So there's now a chance that you get hit by a car coming that way. And of course, if you're really unlucky, you could hit the other car that's just turned in. And then you could be coming down this road, and then you can go left or you can go right. If you're going right, you've got to cross the path of other cars, intercept that one. So there are a number of different places potential to hit other vehicles. And that's what they call conflict points. And that's how they assess the junctions. Now, they also take into account, when they're modeling these, traffic flow, how much traffic is on each road, what proportion of this traffic is turning into the side road. And that's why occasionally these get rejigged and they change the emphasis of which road has priority. But we'll come back to that a bit later. But essentially what we're doing, we're not traffic engineers, what we're trying to do is change people's behavior to mitigate all of those different risks. And the main ones that we've seen is being aware of other road users, good observation, appropriate signaling, and sort of slowing down. But it all comes down to observation largely. But we can't completely mitigate those risks of other people. Now, a lot of it, though, is done in road design, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but it's worth just looking at that idea. As I say, I picked this because this is the simplest one. When you start looking at complex roundabouts, they get horrendously complex as they work out all the different ways that you could come into conflict with somebody. So what do we do? Right, worth reiterating the system. I know, or hope you all know this already. I lifted this slide from one of my earlier ones, and I said, with the system, information, position, speed, gear, and accelerate, we've got a kind of 2-for-1 deal for you. In that It's almost like we've got two different systems going on simultaneously. The first one is taking, using, and giving information. This is very cerebral. It's going on in your head. You're constantly thinking about this. It's high frequency in the sense that for any given hazard, this is going on and on and on. You're cycling around, looking, picking up new information, and using it and giving it. Whereas this one is about car control. This is about changing the car's position, its speed. It's related to how far away you are from the hazard and what else is going on. Of course, it's being fed by information that you're taking in. This will control some of this, and particularly so when we're talking about roundabouts and junctions, this is the case. But it's lower frequency. It might be that you only use this bit once per hazard. Of course, there will be occasions when another hazard occurs while we're approaching, say, a roundabout or a junction, and we need to restart this process. But this is kind of typically once per hazard. Okay, quick recap of the system. We all kind of know that, but it's worth reiterating where we're coming from. This is what it says in the handbook that we should teach our associates. There's a lot about information, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But then it talks about adopting the appropriate position without causing others to alter course speed unnecessarily, adjusting our speed appropriately for the hazard, changing gear, and so on. This bit is fairly straightforward, I would suggest. The main problem with this is people leaving it too late, and so we tend to work on that in the practical sessions. I'm not going to dwell on that because it's very much a practical subject. It tends to be people leave it too late. Once we've got them doing it in the right stage, getting the position earlier, changing their speed in good time and braking effectively, they've got time to change gear and everything else flows. So, but I will come back to this other stuff in a moment. Briefly looking at that, again, I'm reusing one of my earlier slides. As we approach a hazard, which I call the danger zone, this is the minefield, this is the danger area. And what we're trying to do, what we're trying to impress on associates, trainees, is that by the time we get here into the danger zone, we want to have maximum control of the car. In other words, we need to be in full control. We need our hands back on the wheel. We need to be in the correct gear, flexible gear, so that we can adjust the speed, accelerate, decelerate a little bit, whatever we need to do. And we need to be at the correct speed. Now, we know all this stuff, but it's a question of doing it at the right stages. In order to be at the correct speed as we come here in the right gear, then we must have slowed down back up here. We must have been in the right position up here. And that's what we deal with in the practical sessions. On the other hand, the information stage is happening all the way through. When we spot that there's a hazard coming up from back here, we don't know all the detail. We can't know all the detail. It's like one of those old maps that says, here be dragons. You know, we really don't know what's going to happen at that stage as we start to take in information. But by starting early, it gives us more time to anticipate what is likely to happen, prioritize any other hazards that arise, and decide what we're going to do. Effectively, we're creating that driving plan. We're creating that driving plan of what we're going to do. When we start up here, though, we've got very little to go on. So hence we get to that, initially we're planning to stop. We may well have to get here and stop because of the traffic on the roundabout. And until we've got appropriate information, that's all the plan we have. But as we gather more information, then we might be able to look at the traffic flow and so on and recognize a gap is going to be coming. And so we've got an opportunity to go. But our default plan from back here is planning to stop. Okay, we've all seen that sort of thing. But it works for other hazards as well, of course. Here's our T-junction again. And we want to turn right into this road. Now, from back here, I've got limited information. I might, there's my zone of vision, I might be able to see the back of this van. And so immediately in my plan, I think, okay, I'm going to meet a hazard in here. I know about that. This sort of black dot is meant to be a person walking back to their van to get in it and open the door and whatever, but it's hard to see that. I can't see that person, nor can I see this yellow car that's kind of approaching the hazard here. So from back here, it's, as we said, that I can create a plan, but I'm going to have to update it as I get nearer. Now back here, I know about that one. And the main decision I can make at this point is I'm going to make a late decision. Because this is a kind of closed junction in the terms of visibility, I can't see into it. And that's something I can note early on. And we encourage associates to look at it and say, can you see into it or not? If you can't, you are going to be making a late decision. So that alters possibly the way that you approach it. So getting people to spot open or closed and so on early on and predict a late decision is one of the things that we can encourage. But again, it's planning to stop. If I can't see into that until I get to here, then I may well have to stop before I can do anything. What I can't do is plan to go sweeping around the corner head on into the yellow car or whatever, because I just don't have the information. So again, planning to stop, looking to go, different sort of junction this time. Now, a large chunk of it, well, all of the section in the handbook is to do with roundabouts. So it's worth reiterating this just a little bit. And I would say that most people who come to IAM, with a few very notable exceptions which tend to stick in your mind, are okay with positioning on roundabouts. Not universally true, as I say, and I can picture some hairy moments with one or two people, but generally true. So this is a diagram stolen, utilized, reused, whatever, from the highway code. And it basically says, if you're turning left, great, come along in the left-hand lane like this, like the brown car, and carry on round, indicating all the way into there. If you're going straight ahead, like the blue car down here, you can approach in the left-hand lane and stick to this left-hand path. So it's like you've got two concentric circles, one in the middle, one on the outside. You stick to the outer circle and go around. Of course, you could use the inner circle as well to go straight ahead, although they don't actually say that in the highway code. And we've got the green car turning right, so they're going into the inner circle and around that. So the first thing some people have a problem with is inner and outer circle. Now, leaving aside straightening roundabouts and all those other stuff for a moment, I'm talking about the inadvertent straightening of roundabouts where people kind of cut in front of people and so on. So it's worth, even though there are no markings on this basic roundabout, it's worth reiterating that there is an inner and an outer circle for this, and you should stick to ideally one or the other. There's a very good set of videos, nothing to do with this, by somebody called Louise Walsh, who her and a partner do a number of YouTube videos aimed at driving instructors. And I saw a great one where she said, oh, some of my 17-year-olds seem to have a problem with concentric circles. So I explained it this way, that what the heck's this? Well, it's a pizza. It's a pizza under construction. And you've got the crust and you've got the tomatoey bit. So if you're turning left, like this there, stay on the crust, stay crusty. If you're going straight ahead, approach in lane 1, stay on the crust and off there. Only if you're turning right, you're going to approach in the right-hand lane, across the crust, into the tomatoey bit, through the tomatoey bit, but then straight onto the crust again before you leave. What she's emphasizing, I love that description. What it's emphasizing is, if you're doing that, you're changing lanes. And those are the sort of conflict points we saw earlier. So we're often stressing mirror checks and so on as we cross those lanes. And that's the most important part with this. Other things that we might explore, I think, with trainees are use of signals. We always say, well, we'll give a signal if it benefits somebody. So Who does it benefit? What about this green and the blue car? There, blue's not indicating, but green is. Or let's take another one. Brown there, nobody behind him. Who does it benefit if there's nobody behind him? Well, actually, it might benefit this green car because they're waiting to pull out. If they know for definite he's going left, that's useful. Now, I sometimes find associates are thinking in terms of the people behind them for some reason, not necessarily somehow registering that the indicators on the front of the car are quite useful as well in some cases. But there's another concept here as well, that if you think about observation. Now imagine you're the brown car, and we've already said the brown car's indication is useful to the green and the blue one because that helps them pull out. But let's say you've got a scenario like this. There's an awful lot of traffic, let's say, that comes from over here. I'll draw one of my messy arrows on there. We've all seen these sorts of roads where it's like first thing in the morning, incredibly busy, there's tons of traffic, you just can't get in. And you're waiting there. You're the brown car waiting at the side road. Well, green car's indication here is incredibly useful because if in part you're mainly looking for traffic from the right, but if you spot that they're coming all the way around here, and when they get to about this point, they're blocking the road. So this is likely to give you a gap to come out. Now, this is a useful piece of observation that not everybody has thought of, that we're not just looking for a gap emerging. We can sometimes predict what's going to happen by traffic moving around the roundabout that's going to cause a blockage, that's going to block that flow of traffic. So looking for blockers, this is something else we can encourage with associates as part of that, the observation that we're doing. So back to what the handbook says. Now, when I went through this, there's quite a lot of it that is simply feeding information into position, speed, gear, and acceleration. That's fine. So monitor their speed and distance on approach, assesses the speed and position of the road use, etc., etc. So I'm not going to focus too much on that because that goes with what we're doing in there and is part of the practical part of it. But what is interesting, I thought, was some of the other bits. I've highlighted them in yellow, but identifies the type of junction system they're dealing with, identifies hazards and prepares for situations that may arise, accurately identifies the first gap, and so on. These are the core bits that are, I think, are specific to this. Now, the first one struck me as slightly odd. Identifies the type of junction system they're dealing with. I thought, well, blimey, if they can't work out whether it's a crossroads or a roundabout or a T-junction, I'm not sure they should be driving, let alone advanced driving. But then I kind of dug into it a bit more. At this point, there was a great danger of the whole presentation turning into different sorts of road design and so on. I had to do massive editing to take out a large chunk that I'd put in that was then going to take an hour and a half about road design. But so here are a few different sorts of road design, most of which we're familiar with. Here's our bog standard roundabout. You come in, often got 2 lanes. It's flared in the sense that if you're coming along here, this angle bit, this island here that takes you in and kind of guides you in to try and dissuade you from going the wrong way around the roundabout on purpose. Now this other one doesn't do that. That's because it's a compact roundabout and there isn't room to have the extra space, but it still tries to kind of guide you to go the right way around it and distract you. It doesn't stop the odd person going around the wrong way, but that's the idea of it. But then increasingly, we've got light controlled roundabouts. So we come up to there's a set of traffic lights, we get held up for a bit, and when it's our turn, we go to the next one, and then we get held up again, then we get held up again, and eventually it releases us and we can go out again. But there are more and more complex versions of those. This is, I learned through researching this, a throughabout. There's a main road goes down the middle of it, and you get stopped there. But if you're on this one and the lights are with you, you can go zooming straight through the middle. In fact, there's a version of this with a crossroads in the middle. So it's effectively a crossroads with a roundabout round the outside of it. Now, my son lives in Canada. His partner is American. When she came here, she just couldn't understand why on earth we put lights on roundabouts. Why don't you just have a crossroads with some roundabouts, with some traffic lights? And I thought, I hadn't really got a good answer for that one. But anyway. Then we've got, mini roundabouts. I love these. More about that later. I was very tempted. I could turn into a rant in a moment, but try not to do that. Come back to mini roundabouts. A lot of people seem to have problems with those. And then we've got multiple mini roundabouts. So you come up to this, and then you've got another bit, and then you're onto another roundabout. And then you've got, massive roundabouts, the ones you get on motorway junctions. Huge roundabout. Really, really popular in the 60s and 70s with planners, because it was all about speed. You come sweeping along here, great visibility of the roundabout, so you can choose your gap, sweeping in, hardly need to change speed, round onto the motorway, whatever. Worked very well in the 60s and 70s until the traffic increased to the point where you actually haven't got the speed. And it's a pain in the what's it if you're actually on the pedal cycle, because you've got to go miles around the roundabout just to go across there. So gradually they're being replaced. A lot of modern ones look like this. This is a dumbbell one where you go in and there's a little roundabout, straight the road, another little roundabout, slower speed this time, because the design now is about slower speed and slowing people down. And then you get all these weird and wonderful junctions. So there's the main road, and then you get a kind of T junction on the other road, and then you get, here's a dual carriageway, and it should have been a crossroads, but to kind of separate the crossing points, they've staggered it with some crossing point in the middle. And then, there's Spaghetti Junction. You have to, if you're mentioning difficult junctions, you've got to mention, it's in the rules, you just got to mention it, which at the end of the day is a kind of crossroads, just an amazingly complicated one with a bit of a T-junction going on as well. Now, my point with all that was not to educate you, it's just to make you aware there are an awful lot of junction designs, and it's almost impossible to keep up with all the new versions. However, I would suggest that when people come to us, some people are keen to improve their driving full stop. Quite a large number of people who come to our HEM have got issues with confidence particularly with one particular item. Often it's motorways, dual carriageways, and if it's not that, it's complex roundabouts. Often they've got one in particular in mind, nearly always near their house or something, or near Sainsbury's or somewhere where they need to go to that worries them. So their problem areas tend to be, if we're talking about junctions and roundabouts, mini roundabouts, multiple roundabouts, or complex roundabouts. So I'm going to just briefly talk about some of these. So mini roundabouts. Right. This should be extremely easy. I have copied again what it says in the highway code. Mini roundabouts approach these in the same way as normal roundabouts. All vehicles must pass around the central markings, except large vehicles which are physically incapable of doing so. This should be very, very simple. But I've had quite a few associates ask me about this. Is it all right to drive over the middle bit? Is it all right to go the other? And what I think, well, why would you ask that question even? But it's because so many people get this wrong. So many commonly get this wrong. This mini roundabout is near my house. If you went up there and turn right, you get to my house. I wandered around and I filmed this video. Just watch this video clip for a second. Now, that was the first one that went past. The next three I filmed as well, just in case that didn't kind of work out. They all did exactly the same. It is actually a very badly positioned roundabout, because if you were to, it's sort of built into the junction of that. But if I just play that again, the only concession he's made is put his left wheel on the roundabout. Most people sort of actually veer to the right slightly and pass it on the wrong side. This inconveniently have put some blob of paint in the road. Now, actually, I've photoshopped a roundabout out. I'm convinced that's what people see. No roundabout whatsoever. And so actually we've got a double whammy. Firstly, we need to remind people of the rules, which are very simple. Then we've got to be aware of the numpties doing the other thing. Because if I do this properly and go carefully around the roundabout, I'm in great danger of being overtaken by somebody doing the other thing. Assumed I must be turning left. So we have that double thing of reminding them the rules, but beware of the other drivers misusing the roundabout in some way. Mini roundabouts. We've talked about mini roundabouts. We've also those. Now, it so happens there's one of these very close to where I live as well, right next door to the one I've just shown you. But the idea of these is you treat them as two separate roundabouts. I'm sure you know it's clear in the highway code. So you might come up to this one and this one is clear. We come up to this one, maybe something's coming. So you wait in this little stub of a road until it's clear and then you can use that roundabout. But this is the roundabout, the double roundabouts near me. Here's roundabout 1 and roundabout 2 centered there. This little stub of road is minute. That's the white little island in the middle. It's about well, it's less than a car's length. It's probably about 1 meter long. This means that if a car approaches, so here's white mini is on roundabout 1. They're just about to go into roundabout 2. Other car appears. They have to stop on the roundabout. Now, this seems to be a massive surprise to other road users that a car is parked on there. And that, again, what we're getting is a secondary hazard of people stopping dead there, quite legitimately, but another car entering this doesn't always expect another car to stop dead on the roundabout. They should do, but they don't. So again, I think our advice is to remind them of the rules for these things, that you treat them as separate roundabouts, but also beware of numpties. Now, there are, just as I said, you can't do the presentation without mentioning Spaghetti Junction. Any mention of multiple roundabouts, you can't do without mentioning the magic roundabout in Swindon. Those of you who've never seen this, it's worth going to Swindon just to play on it. But
I'm a reserver for the Swindon group, actually.
Are you? Oh, right. Fantastic. Yeah, you can ignore my piece of advice coming up in a moment then. But as you, I should have hand over to you to explain it then. But basically, 5 mini roundabouts around a central circle. If we're coming along here, turn left, great, you just do that. Left at that one, left at that one. But if you're feeling adventurous, you can take any route you like, provided you're legal at each of the mini roundabouts. I think that's right, Kirsten, isn't it? So you could potentially
and the locals do.
Yes, yeah. I think. Oh, I haven't been there for years, to be honest. But I know that one morning I was going to a customer there, and there was a broken bus about here, which made it quite interesting. But it still works. You could still do things, but you can more or less take any route you like. So we could have gone up here, round here, across here. Where did we want to go? Oh, down there, and then down there. So you can more or less take any route through that you like. So very entertaining. Of course, they give you tons of information really helpfully about how you're going to do it. So think, oh, well, it's all about observation and working out where you're going. So here's my advice, just avoid Swindon. So Kirsty, sorry, that probably doesn't apply to your group. Oh, you can move, I suppose.
There's one in Canada as well, of course.
Yeah, I think, yeah, there's other ones now as well. I mean, bizarrely, that's been there since about the 70s, I think, the Swindon one. Now, the one thing that catches lots of people out is what I've termed newfangled roundabouts. That's all the other ones. Now, this isn't a newfangled roundabout. This is the one we've seen before. You come up to it, outer circle, inner circle. So if you prefer, crusty bit, tomatoey bit. That's it. Dead easy. We know about those. We've been taught about them. It's in the highway code. End of story. But now we get something else. Why has he got that weird graphic? It's a spiral roundabout. It's a spiral roundabout. If you look at it carefully, you see there where it's point A spiral begins, and you can trace it round. So it starts in the middle, and it spirals outwards. And so that by the time you get to here, you're in the outside lane. Likewise, there's a second spiral, starts there at point B. And again, you can trace that one round. Now, there is no standard design for this. There's about 5 or 6 designs when I looked it up, depending on how many spirals. There might be 1 spiral, this one's got 2. I think you can have some as many as 4. So you can't have a golden rule. This is what I'm going to do on spiral roundabouts. We can have some general advice. Now, for those of you watching it just for the amazing graphics that I produce in here, you've got to watch this one. This is good. And not, oh no, no, this isn't, this has got a bit of graphics on, but it's not that I spoke too soon there. This is actually yet another sort, technically not a spiral roundabout, but I think we're going to see more of them. This is called a turbo roundabout. And I pinched this whole slide from a Canadian website.
Right.
And why am I telling you that? Because actually it's a Dutch design and you're seeing loads of these on the continent. I think we're going to get more of them. And loads on the continent, loads in Holland, coming in Canada. When I tried to see if we had them in the UK, there's definitely one in Bedford, and I guess there will be other ones. It's the only one Googling it I could find. But this is an American diagram. You can see the arrows all go the wrong way. That's a standard roundabout, and it's joining it from the right. I'm going to do some magic here. Right, so now we've reversed it. So that's your standard roundabout, and look, those are all those collision points, those conflict points we talked about earlier. There's something like 16. This is the new roundabout, the turbo one. If you're going left or straight ahead, as before, you join in the left-hand lane. You carry on round. You can go off there if you want. You carry on round, but the lane markings stop you going round any further. It sweeps you off into that. And in fact, the design in Bedford actually had a wall. It had a physical barrier to stop you carrying on round. That was the plan anyway, but it was objected to by cyclists and motorcyclists, not unreasonably, because having a sort of 1 foot high wall partway around a roundabout is a bit of a safety hazard in its own right. So apparently they didn't do that. It's just road markings. If you want to go straight ahead, you get swept into that lane and you can go off there, or more likely you're carried on round there. And again, there are several variations on this theme. This isn't the only one. I think we're going to see more of those. The key to this is in the text below, which I highlighted yellow, which made it even more difficult to read. So object to the graphics there. By disallowing lane changing on turbo roundabout, conflict points are immediately eliminated. So this, instead of having 16, has got 10 apparently. But the key to this is never changing lanes. And if there's one message for this, for all newfangled roundabouts, try not to change lanes. More of that in a minute. So choose your lane early and don't change your mind. Stick with that lane. Right. Now the amazing graphics. Watch, this is good. And hopefully this comes with a sound effect.
Like a circle in a spiral, like a wheel.
No, the sound effect's not going to work. I'm going to go back to that. So I should be singing, you should be hearing like a circle in a spiral, like a wheel within a wheel.
Well, we did.
We did, but unfortunately not quite. So did you actually hear the original? Anyway, here they go. Red cars in lane 1, green in lane 2. They get swept round by the different spirals. So red car is now in the outside lane and they get swapped off. Green carries on round and they're now back in lane 1 and they get swept off that way. So they're sticking with that. And sometimes it's worth maybe not showing them the animation, but working through with somebody how spiral roundabouts work. What could possibly go wrong? I'll show you what can possibly go wrong. And this is it. And this is what tends to trip people up. As you come into the spiral roundabout, you will see some sort of road markings. Now, there are lots of different designs, so it's not I'm not saying it always looks like this, but on this particular one, it would look something like this. If you're going right, you go into lane 2 on entry, and that sweeps you around. We saw that. If you're going left or straight ahead, you do this. We've got a double-headed arrow, okay? That means at this point, you get a choice. The road splits. There's a fork in the road at that point. So you can predict, and you can tell your associates to expect this. If it's a double-headed arrow, you will get a fork in the road. Now, this is what it looks like. Those of you from Northampton could probably just about make out the road signs. This is, well, near where we have our classroom sessions. This is the, what you call, Queen Ellen roundabout. This way goes on to the main A45 dual carriageway. This way goes on into town and past where we have the classroom sessions. Now, what happens frequently, it's happened to me more than once with associates, they get to here and it's like the sirens are kind of trying to drag them in onto the other turning, and there's a fork in the road, and they go into panic mode. And at that point, they suddenly do an abrupt lane change, rarely looking in the mirror first. Now, this has happened to me a number of times, but you have to kind of reiterate, there is the fork in the road. It's perfectly acceptable to carry on in that lane. If you were in the right lane, that's fine. So I should get rid of all those lines that are still on the screen. If you do the sudden lane change at that point, there is a risk of hitting the green band that was coming round as well. So the advice on these ones is choose your lane you need to be in early before entry, before you go into the roundabout. And this is true of pretty much any newfangled junction system. Don't change your mind. You have to stick with the decision you've taken. And if you've got a double-headed arrow as you come in, you can predict there will be a fork in the road. Don't be phased or panicked by that. So I'm nearly finished, but a couple of things in brother. Newfangled junctions, what they're aiming to do is to reduce the conflict points that we talked about earlier by avoiding crossing other traffic flows. And the way that they do that is lane markings, as we've seen, things like spiral roundabouts, turbo roundabouts, other forms of junctions. Physical barriers, we've all seen the roundabouts where you've got a left turn filter that physically separates traffic from another one. Or traffic lights, where you actually close down one flow of traffic while the other one crosses its path. The other design change is aiming to reduce speed, which is completely contrary to the design principles when a lot of junctions were developed back in the 60s and 70s, when it was about speed of entry. So they do that by putting traffic lights. That's probably, if I was answering my son's partner, American partner's question, it's a sort of retrofit to try and slow the traffic down a bit. They also seek to reduce visibility, which again seems counterintuitive, but again, those from Northampton will recognize that stretch sort of, what's it called, Mereway, isn't it? Is it Mereway as you come towards Tesco's there, where they've put actual fences down the middle of the central reservation. So on approach, you can't see the traffic coming until you're nearly at the roundabout to try and force people to slow down. And they also reduce lane widths as well and make roundabouts physically smaller. The new design specifications try to restrict the size of roundabouts to be much smaller. But if there's one golden rule, it's about getting the correct lane earlier. And back to IAM, and it's about good observation, looking at the road signs, looking at the road markings and so on, and picking the correct lane early. So my final slide, I would say from an IAM point of view, most people coming to us are reasonably okay on standard junctions, but they need refreshers on the less standard ones, the mini roundabouts, the multiple roundabouts, the various forms of complex roundabouts and junctions. And quite a few of them may never have had any training on some of these things like spiral roundabouts. And so it's a kind of, people often feel quite unsure about those sorts of things. But if there is a golden rule for all new kind of junction layouts, it's this: pick your lane early and don't change your mind, I would say. So with that, that's the first phase of it. I've taken rather longer on this. So I now like to open it up and questions, comments, any thoughts people have got related to what we've